How many people in the room are collision repairers? How many of you have heard this statement? That's just the cost of doing business. It's become part of our dialogue, hasn't it? And much like others that have been up earlier, I'm looking at the changes that are occurring. And we've got a tremendous amount of activity that's transforming our industry. I know disruption is the word that's thrown out. Personally, I like the word revolution because it implies that there's an ending point that we're going to hit. So the vernacular for the procedures that we're using on these vehicles today, it's changing. The ADAS technology that's out there is dramatically different than what we've had in the past. But I want to use the word technologies and expand on that because I really believe there's three. There's three crucial safety systems that we have out in these vehicles today. And this technology doesn't just apply to ADAS. We've got the three safety systems, and just for those of you out there, it's my opinion, and this is how I've structured them. One safety system is the energy-absorbing structure of the vehicle, which should not be compromised and is essential to keeping our consumers safe. The second is the restraint systems that are in these vehicles. And now the new and the evolving one that we're all experiencing today is the ADAS systems. So these three systems are making a dramatic change in how we choose to operate our businesses and what we have that we can use. But restoring these technologies, whether they be the safety cage that's around the vehicle or the restraint systems that we've got, or even the ADAS capability to be able to maneuver and guide and keep the car from entering any hazardous areas, all of these require very specific skills and tooling and services to be able to put them back to 100% of their state before a collision. Now, these procedures are now being described in terms that most people, even seasoned veterans in our industry, are unfamiliar with. Things like battery voltage stabilization in order to be able to do a proper scan on a vehicle, or even the panel layering sequence when we're repairing the structure on the vehicle and having to perform procedures in a particular way in order to be able to have those components go back together as they're intended. All of these things are affecting how we look at it, but what it's doing is it's creating a significant amount of friction among industry stakeholders as we start to describe things they've never heard of before. So what I'm hoping to do is come up with something that, maybe guides them. And like all good business seminars, we have to revert to Star Wars, because Star Wars has all the life lessons you need to run a business. So from the Master Yoda, these aren't the charges you're looking for. And as a repairer, we're supposed to just accept that and move on. But the reality is that this friction that is created, we're left with just basically a canned response. And that canned response is, that's just a cost of doing business when it's a procedure that's unfamiliar. It looks like something they've never seen before, and it's not actually accounted for in a way that makes sense to the repairer or the vendor that you're working with, or even the consumer in many cases. So this canned response implies that it's not a direct cost, that it's actually a fixed cost of the business, and in no way, shape, or form does this have any effect on the price that it could cost to fix that vehicle or perform that repair. And this is where the challenge comes in. So for me, I'm very simple. I'm a black and white kind of guy. I like numbers. They add up, and they always add up the same way when you add them up, unless you use creative accounting. And to avoid that, an organization created something called Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. And all of the businesses that we have that are publicly traded or used in the marketplace typically require some form of standardization in the way we represent those numbers and how we discuss them. So it kind of makes sense that we use this set of accounting rules. And there's 10 general principles. I won't talk about those, about generally accepted accounting principles. But there's one that's very good for us. Any company that is publicly traded or has shares that they produce documents for the public typically follows generally accepted accounting principles. And the reason for that is it allows us to have these concepts and definitions and principles as a basic set of guideline rules. And the purpose of that is so that we all look at these numbers the same way in a transparent and, more importantly, a consistent way. Now, I'm not going to get into all the details because I'm a math geek doesn't mean everybody else in the room is. So there's really just two kinds of expenses when we deal with repairs on a vehicle or even a collision repair business specifically. So we have overhead expenses, which you can see on the left-hand side. And these are things that you really can't avoid, or what I call non-avoidable expenses. And then we have direct costs. And direct costs are typically avoidable expenses. And so to break that down very quickly, in the collision business, overhead items like staff expenses, marketing expenses, rent, property taxes, and any of the utilities that you pay typically are something you're going to be incurring, and you can't really avoid that expense if you don't fix cars. However, direct costs, on the other side of the coin, those represent some of the variable costs that increment up as you perform the repairs. So things like cost of productive labor, materials, even the performing of technology-related procedures, understanding those technology-related procedures, because training a technician to perform a task may very well be, when you send them off to training, that may very well be an overhead-based expense. However, if you have that very same technician have to learn and understand how to perform a very specific procedure on a unique year, make, and model of a vehicle, that is an expense that you could avoid. And based on generally accepted accounting principles, that would be something that would be called a direct cost, or a cost specifically related to the repair. So what I hope to do for the repairs, and I would encourage you to consider this, is create a test or have a test to determine where that avoidable expense might be and how that avoidable expense might look. Is that expense an avoidable cost? And it's a pretty simple test. Could you avoid the cost if you did not perform the repair? And if you can avoid the expense by not performing the repair, is it a specific cost of that individual job? And the challenge in this is, you may have heard your buddy charges a particular procedure. And yet when you try and charge that particular procedure, you get told it's not worth it. Or they're not willing to pay it. Or it's a cost of doing business. And what that says to me is that perhaps that friction hasn't been lubricated enough. And you may need to actually document the reasoning behind that needed or requested procedure in an adequate way. Make sure you speak about it in the same language that most large organizations understand, which is generally accepted accounting principles, and say that's not an avoidable cost. If I didn't do that repair, I wouldn't have that cost or that investment of time and energy. That means that it's an avoidable expense. That's an avoidable expense. It's very important for you to consider how you look at it. And if your current business relationships are extremely highly frictional, it may very well be that you aren't adequately documenting everything that you need in terms of a repair and a reimbursement charge that you're looking for doing. So with that, I would say this. If you change the way you look at things, the things that you look at typically change. And this is Wayne Dyer, and it's a very poignant point. So thank you, and I'll hand it off to the next person.